Thank you to all the attendees who are joining the webinar. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to join, and we'll start our webinar very shortly. And we will also be going live on our Facebook page. So it's now 6:01. I think we can start in approximately 2 more. So to all the attendees who have already joined us, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. All participants except panelists and presenters will have their video turned off and their audio on mute for the duration of the session.
Thank you. This is Azhar Samkhan, Director General, DOIT.
Thank you, sir.
Do you hear me?
Sorry,
yes, we can. Thank you for joining, sir. We're just beginning. We'll just start in a minute. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I think I'm a little bit late.
No, you're fine. You're fine, sir. Absolutely fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are just doing a quick round of announcements and we'll start very soon. To all the attendants, you may use the Q&A panel to add your questions or comments. Please note that this virtual event discussion is being recorded. A few screenshots will also be taken for the purpose of documentation and reporting. We thank you in advance for your consent and cooperation. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar along with the PowerPoint presentation to all attendees at the end of the webinar. Moreover, to all our media friends present, we will be sharing a copy of the press release, both English and Bangla version, at the end of the webinar. Moreover, all of these resources will be available on our website right after the webinar itself. So I think, Imran Bhai, if you would like to start, I'm giving you the floor whenever you're ready.
Right. I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you very much, Zareen. And welcome, everyone. Thank you to all the discussants who are here, and I will introduce the discussants later. So today's webinar is on COVID effects on the youth of Bangladesh. This is one of the many studies that BIGD has been doing in the context of understanding the effects of COVID on different population segments and different types of issues in Bangladesh. And we have been working on exploring the different types of effects of COVID over the last 1 year. So we are really pleased to bring this to you. One of our work on the COVID effects on the youth of Bangladesh. And as you will basically hear, that this is of great importance in terms of the recovery of the overall economy, because it is ultimately the labor market involvement and the productivity of the youth that in many ways determines how fast we can get into a growth trajectory. So it's critically important that we understand the dynamics of the effect of COVID on this population segment. So I don't want to come back towards the end again, but at this stage I would like to invite the researchers, Shakil Ahmed and Asma Tabassum, two researchers from BIGD who have been leading this work to present the findings of the study. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Imran Bhai, and thank you everyone who's here with us today. So as Imran Bhai has just said, today we'll be discussing about the COVID effects on the youths in Bangladesh. And before I dive into discussing about the findings of this study, I would like to take a moment to just talk about our motivation behind conducting this study. So we know that the COVID-19 and the containment measures that were taken has more affected the informal sector at a greater extent. And this while many studies have shown that there has been some recovery in the informal sector, the recovery has been slow, and there's also a lot of fragility to it. Now, especially to our country, the informal sector is really important because it takes such a huge part of our economy, and especially to the youths, because 95% of our youths are employed in the informal sector. Youths are also more likely to be engaged in more entry-level jobs, and as a result, they are more prone to job losses in the beginning when something like this happens. We also know that educational institutions have been closed for over a year now, and there has been just so much uncertainty with exams and jobs and everything. So it's likely that one will assume that the youths are more affected due to the pandemic. However, there have not been any specific surveys or studies done to understand what's actually happening to youth jobs or incomes during this pandemic. And this is exactly where we want to contribute by this study to fill this gap and to understand the effect on youths a little bit better. So right now, I will discuss firstly the presentation structure, how it's going to be. And so firstly, we will talk about the current state of youths, how the youths were already doing before the pandemic hit. And after that, I'll talk about how our survey was designed and our sample profile. And finally, we'll move on to understanding the impact of COVID on youths. And we'll focus on three main sectors. First is youth employment and NEET. And then secondly, we'll look into the gender differences, which is, are women actually bearing a greater brunt of this pandemic? And finally, we'll talk about youth learning in this 1 year. So first of all, I'd like to discuss how youths were doing. So we know that more than a third of the population of Bangladesh are youth. This indicates that we have what is called a youth bulge. Now, while this is a natural demographic transition reality, what's more important for us to focus here is the positive correlation between economic growth and having a large size of the working population. Given the fact that we are making productive use of our youths, this window of opportunity is limited because declining birth rates and improving longevity will reverse at one point. However, our reality is challenging when it comes to turning this youth bulge into a demographic dividend. Why is that? Well, because unemployment among youth is much higher than the general population. It's 12%, and it's 3 times more than the general working population. And even among the youths who are working, 95% of them are employed in the informal sector. Now, we know how precarious and vulnerable informal sector jobs can be, and this pandemic just reflects that. And to top that, the 38% of Bangladeshi youths are not in any kind of education, earning, or training, what we call NEET. And what our percentage is much higher, 16% higher than global average and 9% higher than the South Asian average. About 5% have tertiary education, and only 14% have any kind of vocational training. And even among the youths who have tertiary education, unemployment rate is even higher, which is 34%. Bangladesh also ranked very low, in fact, 177 of 183 countries that were in the employment and opportunities domain in the Global Youth Development Index. Now, this reflects that we have not been able to really utilize our demographic dividend that effectively. So with all of that in mind, we conducted this survey, and the first survey was basically done by BRAC and BIGD in 2018. And this was a nationally representative survey, and it covered 5 districts across Bangladesh and 4,200 youths aged between 15 to 35 years old. This was a face-to-face survey, and what we did here in 2021 was we conducted a follow-up phone survey on this group of youths who, after 3 years, fell in our cutoff range of 18 to 35 years old. Our success rate was 51%, and our total sample size was 1,929. Now, while this success rate might seem low, but this was actually the first time a phone survey was conducted on this sample. And in general, this is how success rates for first-time phone surveys usually are. Main reason for this is because it's been 3 years since the face-to-face survey was done, and we collected the phone numbers back then. And many people within this time have changed their phone numbers or stopped using those phones and all of that. So right now that we have a much clearer database for our follow-up surveys, we expect a better success rate. This slide shows a snapshot of our sample profile. we see that 48% of our sample were men and 52% were women. Urban youths were 22% and rural youths were 78% of our sample. The average age of youths was 25 years old, and 41% of our sample were engaged in income-generating activity, and the rest were students and housework. This bar chart will show that the number of youths who were in housework were mostly women, and of course, men had a greater percentage in those youths who were engaged in IGA. Now, the next segment will focus on how the COVID-19 has actually affected youth jobs and incomes. So for this analysis, we looked into the youths who were working before the pandemic, which was February 2020. And we asked them how they were doing as of January 2021. So we see that 15% of these youths who were employed last year have gone out of the labor market. Now, this rate is much higher than what we have found in our other surveys done by PPRC and BIGD livelihood survey in March 2021, which showed that 8% of pre-COVID employed workers were no longer in the labor market. There are also some differences in urban and rural youths. So while we see that during the lockdown period in April 2020, urban youths lost greater amount of jobs, 56% compared to rural youths. However, when it comes to recovery, midterm recovery in January 2021, we see that in terms of incidence of employment regain, we see that youths who were in urban areas actually gained their jobs at greater percentage. There was also a lot of difference between the youths in rural areas, between youths and the ones in the general working population, as we find in our PPRC-BIGD survey. We find that 16% of rural youths were out of the labor market, but only 6% of people who are in the general occupation were out of the labor market. Next, we focus on the change in income. Now, this analysis only focuses on the youths who were actually in employment in both time periods, last year and also January 2021. Even among them, we see that there was an income decrease of 11% below pre-COVID levels. Now, while it might seem positive that so many of youths have actually regained their jobs or they have found some alternative form of income generating activity, average incomes have fallen much. Average income measure shows that the situation is not that bright. There's also some difference between urban and rural youths. We see that the urban youths have suffered a lot more when it comes to income, and it's actually a 15% drop compared to rural youths, which was only 9%. Average weekly hours also fell by 3% in total. Now, this slide shows the occupational distribution of the youths who lost their jobs. So, as you can see here, the sectors that were most affected with the prolonged job loss were private tutors, teachers, handicrafts, were youths working in private sector or private NGOs, and factory workers. Now, you can see that these sectors require sort of a higher level of skills compared to sectors such as day labor or transport work helpers. And these sectors have suffered a greater loss in terms of jobs compared to the more essential sectors. Educational institutions have been closed for more than a year, and that can explain why there's a prolonged job loss among teachers and also private tutors, because private tuition usually needs close physical contact. And during the pandemic, people were, of course, hesitant to have private tutors. Now we look into the scenario of how the youths were doing compared to the general population. Now here we compare again our findings from the PPRC-BIGD livelihood survey conducted in March 2021 and our youth survey. So we see that per capita household income was 7% below pre-COVID levels, and average income of youths were 11% below pre-COVID levels. Although the two measures are different and it's not directly comparable, it does give us an indication of how they were doing compared to the general population. In terms of jobs, 15% of youths are no longer in IGA, whereas 8% of the general population are no longer in IGA. To conclude here, we see that youths are faring worse in terms of both income as well as jobs compared to the overall working population. So our next segment focuses on the gender differences that we find in our analysis. Here we try to answer the question on whether young women are bearing a greater brunt of the pandemic. Firstly, we know that young women are already faring worse in the youth labor market compared to men, because young women have an unemployment rate which is higher than that of young men, 14% compared to 10% of men. The unemployment rate of young women who have tertiary education is also higher than men. It's 43% compared to 30%. And lastly, as we know that a great amount of our youths are in NEET, 90% of them are women. So how has COVID-19 affected this, or what are the implications? So as we can see here, when we did the analysis on young women and men, a third of young women who were working before the pandemic are out of the labor market now. And this rate is actually 3 times higher than that of men. While we see that during the lockdown period, the difference between job losses between young men and women was not as much. When it comes to the midterm effect in January 2021, you see that the job loss for women is much higher. A quick look at the occupational distribution by gender can help us explain why women face a greater job loss. So you can see here the sectors that are more hardly hit, like handicrafts or private tutor, teacher, and private and factory workers. We see that the proportion of women working in this sector is much higher than men. So this can explain why females have suffered a greater job loss here. And it's partly it can be explained by the occupational segregation here. Again, we look into men and women differences in terms of those who were working in both time periods. And here we see that even among the women who have been able to regain their jobs or remained in employment, they have faced a massive income drop. Their incomes on average decreased by 21%, which is more than twice than what young men have faced. This could be for many reasons that our survey cannot explain, but a part of it can be explained by the average weekly working hours. We can see here that women faced a decrease in their working hours by 15% compared to only 1.5%. Now, this is a major matter of concern because even among women who have somehow managed to keep their jobs, they are not able to give as much time to income generating activities as before. So what are the implications for young women here? So many working women being out of the labor market for such a long time can also take them permanently out of the labor market. And that will further reduce the already low rate of women labor market participation we have. This could also increase the proportion of females who are in NEET. Why is that? Well, because these women who have been out of the labor market for such a long time, they're more likely to not even engage in other training or education, and this will increase NEET and, even worse, the proportion of women in NEET. Overall, this will have a negative impact on economy and women's empowerment in Bangladesh. Whatever progress we have made so far might be reversed or threatened due to this. In the next segment, we asked all youths about how confident they were about getting future jobs in the post-COVID job market. We see that 62% of our respondents have expressed confidence about getting into IGA. However, young women, whether they were students or whether they were already in income generating activities, reported a much lower confidence level than men. Now, in general, one can think that somebody who's already in IGA will report a greater confidence compared to somebody who is a student. And we can see this difference in terms of men, but not so much for women. Women are equally less likely to be confident when it comes to getting future jobs. So that was all from my part. I would like to hand over to Shakil Ahmed, who is a Senior Research Associate at BIGD. Over to you, Shakil bhai.
Thank you, Asma. Thank you all for joining us today. As you know that during the pandemic, mental health is going to be the major concern globally. So as long as the young people are concerned, we need to keep them fit, mentally fit during this pandemic. Otherwise, it will be a very great loss for our nation as well. So a recent report published by World Economic Forum shows that around 85% of the young people are suffering from depressions. So next slide, please. So to understand the level of mental well-being among the young people, we use short Warwick Edinburgh mental well-being scale. So it's a widely used scale in different organizations, and they estimate the mental well-being of the different group of people with this scale. So this scale contains 7 statements. For example, I can say that I have been feeling close to other people's, for example, and other one is I have been dealing my problems well. Also on these statements on a Likert scale, ranging from none of the time to all of the time. So this, and finally, we aggregated these points to generate a scale, mental well-being score. So this score where the minimum score is 7 and the maximum score is 35. And the higher the score is, and the higher the mental well-being. So this mental well-being score has been divided in 3 conditions, like probable depressions, possible depressions, and no anxiety. Next slide, please. Now we come to our study and the data. So here we have been collected the data for April 2020, when the first lockdown was imposed, and in February 21, when there was no lockdown. So all over the data shows that the female are mostly depressed. Female are mostly depressed than the male. For example, irrespective of the situation. So if we consider April 2020, we see that 25% male are depressed, and this was 31% for female. And in February 21, it was 6% for male and 11% for female. So this shows that the female are mostly depressed in this case, and the similar result is shows also in the for non-anxiety or non-depression cases. And we see those who are not depressed in April 2020. So it was 59% for male and 50% for female. And after 8 months, it increased to 93% for male and 87% for female. So still the female are mostly depressed in this pandemic situation. So next slide, please. If we mulling over to the improvement, so we can see that 20% of the young women, those who are depressed in April 2020, still they are depressed, and 12% for the young men. So we can say that male are better coping with the depressions during this pandemic situation. Next slide. So now we are going to discuss about the COVID effect on youth learning. So here actually we'll give this expression that how youth are using their time during this pandemic. As Asma said that since March 2020, all educational institutions are closed, and we have 25% youth in our sample. Those who are students. So we have the expectation that these students are using their time, leisure time on training or online educations or something like that. But after the survey, we find that less than 5% of the youths took any kind of training during this period, and less than 50% youth feel that they need some sort of trainings to cope with the post-COVID job market. So next slide. So beside the phone service sample, we have another set of sample. We actually posted our shorter version of our questionnaires on the Facebook and in different groups, on online groups. So we kept it posted from 12 to 31 March 2021. So finally, we got 538 response from this survey. So it actually the web-based survey, we can say that. And this group is a bit different from our phone survey groups because they are more educated. They are from the higher socioeconomic background and more digitally literate. Next slide. If we go through their demographic information, so we see that their average age is 25 years. So which is almost similar to our original sample, phone survey sample. And around 42% are engaged in income generating activities, and 34% are students, and 1% are working at home. So, and in this sample, we have 69% men and 31% women. Among the men, we can say that there around 46% are engaged in income generating activities, which is 31% for female. On the other hand, 44% female are engaged are student, which is only 30% in the male. So go next slide. Asma, go to next slide. Next slide.
Yes. Can you see it?
No. Oh yes. Okay. Thank you. The most important findings from our web survey is that we see that in this group, 27% of the respondents took any kind of training or online courses, and 85% think that they need some sort of trainings to cope with the future job markets after COVID. So this is the important findings. So we say that if there is, for phone survey, there is some sort of reluctant among the young people to take training or take any course online. But those who are online, or those who are digitally literate, those who are from higher economic class, they are more they have more interest on training on online courses. So next slide, please. So what is the implications of these findings? So the major implications of these findings are: majority of the youth did not take part in any new trainings through education institution closed or over a year. So because they are now engaged in different activities, but they are not doing any productive works. So that's why this is very harmful for the society as well. On the other hand, we can say that human capital, there is a chance of building human capitals, because their school is closed. They can take some sort of trainings, but they are not doing that. So we are thinking that in the future, there will be a problem with the human capital developments, because they are now very much habituated with the passing leisure times and with the source media and entertainment. And after that, we say that there is a gap in skill among the higher social class and the higher economic class and the poor economic class, because previously we say that the more richer groups are more interested in trainings, but the poorer groups are not that. So that's why the gap is increasing among them. So finally, we can say that skills they might require for the post-COVID job markets, they are not acquiring that skills. So it would be harmful in the future. So now I'm handing over to Asma for takeaway messages.
Thank you, Shakil bhai. So to sum this up, we have three main key takeaways of this presentation. So firstly, we see that how youths in Bangladesh are already not doing very well in terms of employment, in terms of NEET. And with COVID here, we see that they have also faced a greater job and income loss. And we have also seen that this is much worse for youths who are in urban areas, as their income generation recovery is way less than those in rural areas. Secondly, we see that the midterm effect on young women is much larger in terms of both income and job loss, as well as working hours. Women are doing much worse than men. And this can have massive consequences for the future and of the labor market, women's labor market participation, as well as their empowerment in the economy. And lastly, as Shakil bhai has explained, that very few youths in our sample acquired any additional training, despite of educational institutions being closed for more than a year. This indicates that there the inequality that is in skills acquisition that already exists in Bangladesh is likely to be worsened. The more educated and the more digitally active youths are acquiring more digital skills compared to that of the general population. And this can also increase inequality in labor market and in the future as well. So that was all from our side. I would like to pass it to Imran Bhai if you have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, very insightful presentation. I would now move to the discussants, but before I do that, I just, I think the three points have been very well kind of summarized and synthesized here. It'd be good to, for perhaps the discussants to really, speak to, these three main takeaways, and in terms of what global evidence is with respect to these types of takeaways. Would like to listen, in terms of national strategy. Would like to listen in terms of, what NGOs and, such as BRAC are doing. And finally, would like to, kind of also hear what the government's priorities and plans are with respect to tackling these three critical areas that have been identified in this presentation, which are, and again, these are things that we actually have seen across different studies that we have done. The importance of the effects of the COVID being much deeper in the urban geography is something that we keep on encountering, keep on finding across different studies. We have found this in the BIGD PPRC survey that we have done. So there's something about the urban space, and we find this also in the context of on the youth labor market participation. So I think that's really important. So if you can really hear something about the urban space, and what the thinking is here in terms of kind of rejuvenating things here. The second is women and gender. I mean, the gender dimension of the COVID effect is clear. We have seen this again in many other surveys, and we're seeing this in the youth survey as well. And it's particularly depressing in terms of, and concerning in terms of seeing this in the context of the youth labor market. Not wholly surprising, but I think concerning, deeply concerning. Particularly, kind of what we're observing is, over the midterm, we see the effects to be growing, against women. And I think that is particularly worrying because, even in the immediate term, we don't see too much of a gender effect. Over the midterm, we see things getting, kind of harder for a woman to get back into labor market, to even maintain their employment status. So I think this is something, not only the gender aspect, but the fact that it's getting worse. It seems to be getting worse over time. And this is the second one. And the third is this digital divide. The digital divide and its implication in terms of youth skill acquisition. I think these are the three areas that have been identified here. I just wanted to, kind of bring that to the fore again. So let me first invite Dr. Jennifer Seeger, who's a development economist and assistant professor of global health and economics in the Department of Global Health at George Washington University. She's a quantitative researcher with the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence, GAGE, and PIGD is a partner along with School of Public Health in this. Jennifer, over to you. Of course, you're free to talk how you want to reflect, but I would really like to hear from you in terms of the global sort of evidence in these areas. Over to you, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you very much. As mentioned, I work on this project, Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence, and I particularly work in data collection on Bangladesh. And as I was looking at the slides that I was provided ahead of time on what the survey had found, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some recent data collection that we've done with adolescents. So these would be sort of the younger cohort from the survey results that we just saw in relation to employment activities and education. And I feel a little bit like I'm going to be sort of piling on in terms of the issues and concerns that we see sort of reflecting very well in the younger cohort. So I'll just go here. So Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence is a global research program that's doing data collection among adolescents age 10 to initial cohort was 10 to 12 and 15 to 17, and we've been following them over time. And during this COVID-19 pandemic, we've engaged in phone surveys with adolescents, and so there are activities happening in several locations, Gaza, Ethiopia, Jordan, Lebanon, and then also in Bangladesh. We've engaged in surveys with 5,000 adolescents around Bangladesh, a group of adolescents in Dhaka, which is who we're going to be focusing on. What my results sort of focus on today is adolescents living in Dhaka, but also samples of adolescents living in Cox's Bazar, near and around the sort of Rohingya refugee camps, and then school-going adolescents in Chittagong and Sylhet. So to talk a little bit about the sample. So for our adolescents living in Dhaka, these are adolescents that were living in 3 low-income settlements in central Dhaka and on the periphery of Dhaka. So these are more like low-income, densely populated settlements. We initially did surveys with these adolescents in December 2017 to January 2018. So interesting timing also with the baseline of the previously presented survey. And at that time, it was with 780 adolescents aged 10 to 12 and 15 to 17. So we did follow-up surveys with them. We have 2 rounds of follow-up surveys during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's where the findings that I'm going to be presenting today will be focused. So we did our first round of virtual surveys in May to June 2020. And at that time, we were able to follow up with 602 of those adolescents who are now aged like 12 to 20. And then we did a second round of surveys this past March to April, so fairly recently. And at that time, we were only able to follow up. Well, we had sort of another drop off of follow up, so that we were able to follow up with 485 of those initial adolescents. So from baseline to our sort of March, April, we have a follow up rate of around 62%. And I think it's interesting to see how much of a drop off that is, even during the pandemic, maybe pointing to some increased mobility of these populations as a result of the impact of the pandemic in these urban settings. So I'm just going to jump into sort of looking at how the pandemic has impacted these populations in terms of sort of paid work and skilling. And I think you'll see that it complements well or follows closely to the patterns we saw with sort of the next cohort up. And so I think an interesting point to think about then is what this implies not only for the current group of youth, 18 to 35, but also thinking about sort of the future, given that we're seeing sort of gaps also in this younger cohort that are, of course, 12 to 20. So first, in our sample, 22% of our sample were working immediately prior to COVID-19. But among those adolescents who were working prior to COVID-19, we asked them who were still working during the pandemic. And so only about 41% of adolescents who had been working prior to COVID-19 reported working in our May to June survey. And there's a slight increase up to 46% reporting that they're working in the March to April, indicating that sort of job losses to this age group have sort of stayed stagnant, I guess, over the pandemic time period. But what this actually really hides is big gender disparities in what these employment rates look like. So when we look at male versus female, we actually see a very similar pattern to what we saw with the older age group. The impact on employment among males and females were very similar in the initial impact of the pandemic and job losses, with about 60% of adolescents losing jobs as of May to June 2020. But then when we look at the most recent survey in March to April, you can see that there were sort of gains in reemployment for males, so that now 54% of males are working, but very little reemployment of females. So, and in fact, an increase in job losses to girls aged 12 to 20. So we can see that employment, even for the younger age group, in terms of continuation and reemployment for girls is quite weak during the pandemic. So given that there's been job losses among adolescents who've been working, we had a job search and skills development module in this most recent round of surveys in March, in the March survey. And what we find is that around 30% of males report that they've searched for jobs in the last 12 months, and 22% of females, so around a little lower than a third of adolescents are looking for jobs during this time period. But again, in terms of engaging in any kind of skills building or courses, apprenticeships, or internships during the pandemic, only 5% of adolescents in this age group are reporting any of that. And especially given that schools have been closed during this time period, which could provide an opportunity for engaging in other types of skill building activities, I think this is a bit concerning. And also, I think closely reflects the rate of skill building that we saw in the older cohort. So then, sort of turning toward, okay, this cohort of youth, 12 to 20 are more school age adolescents. And so what's happening in terms of education and learning, given that schools have been closed since March of last year. So in our sample, 62% of the sample were enrolled in school immediately prior to COVID. And so among those who were enrolled, we asked questions in both rounds of survey about support from schools and support from family. So when we initially did the surveys in May, June 2020, only about 16% of adolescents reported that schools were providing some sort of support for learning. So this has increased, which is a positive up until our survey in March to April, where 35% of adolescents are reporting support from school. But again, that's still quite a low rate if we're thinking about continued learning for these adolescents who are in school immediately prior to COVID-19. And then, family support has been high throughout the pandemic, but we also see, a slight increase of reported family support, perhaps in response to the sort of prolonged closures in school. Adolescents who were enrolled in school have also been engaging in different, learning activities. And so we asked some questions in our surveys about how they're continuing their learning. What are the resources they're using to continue learning during the pandemic and school closures? And so this is not the full list of responses, but sort of the most common responses. So first, most adolescents report that they're continuing their learning with books. So 80% initially, that's dropped down to 65% in the most recent survey in March to April, and perhaps partially offset by an increase in continued learning from 4% to 11% from assignments that are being given from the schools. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to come to is, particularly for this age group, thinking about job and education aspirations, and thinking about how this pandemic and the school closures and have affected sort of their aspirations for the future. What we see is that we see maybe a slight trend in downward in aspirations to a professional career. So 74% of females in May to June 2020 reported aspiring to a professional career, and this has sort of slightly dropped to 67%. And we also see slight reductions in aspirations for university education. And we see in terms of adolescents being concerned about constraints to achieving their aspirations, we see that there's sort of large increases in reported financial constraints interfering with job aspirations, which I think is concerning to think about. So with that, I conclude. I think that this kind of points to, these findings for the younger cohort points to basically bolstering the policy recommendations from the previous, from the main survey being presented here today, and sort of points toward needing to put some policy focus on, how we transition these the youth back into education and learning opportunities and human capital development in the long term. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jennifer. I wasn't expecting a presentation on the adolescent group, but it's really useful, I think, because I think it sort of provides us a much more of the whole age group, if you like, in some ways the second decade of life type of a perspective on this. So I think we now have a fuller picture in many ways and a reinforced picture. I think the only place where I see, things are actually worse are not totally unexpected in terms of job recovery for adolescents, because they tend to be obviously in a far most, early career type of, starting level kind of things, activities and roles. And it's sort of, with an economic downturn, it's easy to get them out, and it's much more difficult. So thank you. Great. Let's now move to Dr. Mohammad Munir Hussain, as a National Program Officer, Adolescent and Youth Unit, and National Program Analyst for Bangladesh at the UNFPA. His work primarily focuses on program design, policy advocacy, and providing strategy support to the government on issues of SR, HR, gender, and life skills. Dr. Munir, what I would really, you obviously, can reflect on any part, but I would really like to, because of your role in at a more strategic level, at the sort of national policy strategy level, it'd be really great if you could reflect the findings that I think both the presentations, I think, reinforce each other on. So over to you, Dr. Munir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imran Mutin. I'm really delighted to be a part of this webinar. This is really very informative and would really help us in future for thinking of our young people in Bangladesh. Yes, as you asked for, from the policy perspective, the situation we have, the situation we just actually experienced from the presentation from BIZ, and also presentation from Jennifer. I think there has been a lot of issues we need to consider in upcoming policy discussion. Like, I want to actually talk about the youth policy first, and the youth. We are in the process of developing, finalizing the action plan to implement youth policy. So youth policy talks about all of the youth groups in Bangladesh. That's very true, and also talks about the building skills and different livelihood skills, life skills, and also creation of jobs, giving them enough skills to cope in disasters. And this kind of situation, this kind of pandemic situation, it is not mentioned, but disasters and humanitarian conditions are mentioned in the youth policy. But time has come also to look back into the policies, this kind of policies, to incorporate a situation like this. And I think we have, we still have an opportunity to bring this issue into the action plan. So different ministries who are involved in implementing youth policy can think of their role to actually cope this pandemic, this kind of pandemic situation through the youth group of Bangladesh. And this a huge youth bulge in Bangladesh currently where we see, and we need to prepare this youth to fight against this COVID pandemic, and also upcoming any kind of pandemic we can see in future. So we need to think from the policy and strategic level how we can actually develop this youth group in Bangladesh, so that they can protect the interest of Bangladesh, they can protect the economy of Bangladesh, they can protect the society and also the state of state as a whole from this kind of disaster. And I think as because of this COVID pandemic, for a long time, the schools and the education institutes are closed, and many of the youth would not come back to these institutes. So we need to think of providing them different alternative education or training, skills training. And here, different ministries. I see Director General Sir is here. The Department of Youth Development has an ample opportunity to actually come forward for this youth who would not go back to or come back to institutes for the formal education. The different youth training centers are there in Bangladesh, and also other youth offices providing trainings. I can tell you, I mean, in last week I was visiting in the southern part of Bangladesh, and also talking to different youth participants in the skills training of youth training centers. I found them, they're really interested to attend, to come to this kind of training. But unfortunately, and also the women, I talked to the women who were attending these trainings. They're really interested to come, but they told me that, you know, their opportunities are not that many. For example, I talked to the officials and they told me that the number of, you know, youth they enroll in the training courses, the application they receive is at least 3 times higher. So that means there is a huge demand of this kind of trainings. So I think we need to focus on how to increase the availability of these training opportunities for the youth people in Bangladesh. And you know, when not only these hard skills like livelihood skills, but we need to think about the life skills, the soft skills, the transferable skills, because this kind of pandemic, we need to face not only with the livelihood skills or hard skills, but also life skills. When UNFP is supporting, you know, different YTCs to provide life skills, and I talked to them, and they said they are not feel confident to cope any kind of challenging situation. They have this creative kind of ideas. They have this problem solving ideas and decision making skills. But these are not that much in the other courses where UNFPA, on other centers where UNFPA and other organizations are supporting. So we need to think of this kind of additional skills training for the youth participants. And also, we also need to think of from the health perspective, especially the mental health. What we found in the study, that depression is coming, and you know, because of this long COVID situation, we know that many people who are recovering from COVID, they are suffering long COVID, and depression is one of the major issue in long COVID. And these mental health psychosocial services needs to be increased in Bangladesh. But unfortunately, this kind of service is not well accepted, and also the government service facilities are not enough. So we need to increase in these areas the availability of services. The thing is, we can provide trainings and the mental health services and other services, but we need to create more jobs for the youth population. You know that because of COVID, the mortality is higher among the older age group. This is what this can result in youth-headed household, more number of youth-headed household in the society. So that youth needs more job, more employment opportunities, more entrepreneurship opportunities. So government and other, you know, stakeholders needs to come forward to create the environment, create more jobs for the youth, and that would help really the youth population to cope up with this pandemic. And it's not only about the mental health and job creation, but also the other health service, sexual reproductive health service. I am working with the sexual reproductive health for the young people. And you know that because of this COVID, other health service has really affected. So we actually don't get the quality service, the number of quantity of the service we don't have at this time because of the COVID pandemic. So we also need to actually ensure the other health services, especially sexually reproductive health services for the youth population. And I think if we can consider all these issues for the youth in policies and also strategies and also action plans, I hope that we will be able to challenge this or cope this or minimize the damage of this pandemic. So I will stop here at this moment. Happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Munir. I think you raised obviously a number of issues, but I was just noting, and maybe we can come back later to some of this discussion. But I think this point that you raised about mental health and mainstreaming mental health as a part of recovery. I think as a part of COVID recovery, I think, and we have seen this across again, I mean, especially among the children and young people, I think we need to think very seriously about mainstreaming mental health as a part of recovery program design and mainstreaming this. I think this is going to be really, really important. So I think this is one point, perhaps, we can get back. And I was quite intrigued by the notion of youth-headed household. I can see the dynamics and I can see through which this may happen. And there may be a kind of a different type of a generational responsibility, step up that I think young people may have to be forced to do. And again, one is to see how widespread this is, but I think this clearly is also a new I think way of thinking about this. But hopefully we can come back to some of these points. Let me now move to Joydeep Sinaroy. Joydeep is Head of Operations Skills Development Program at BRAC. He has over 10 years of experience in the skills development sector, designing solutions for addressing youth unemployment through skills training and employment generation. So Joydeep, my my question to you, and again, you're free to pick up on other areas as well, is particularly around the digital divide, and how do we actually address this? And again, in the context, one is the sort of the digital skills divide that we see. The difference between our online survey and our general survey is very, very telling. The other is sort of also this whole thing, and I think Dr. Munir talked about this, which is this kind of so-called soft skill, life skill. I see that as growth skills. So maybe in these two areas, perhaps you could reflect in both these two areas and maybe say something about what BRAC is doing. But over to you, Joydeep.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Imran Bhai. And thank you, PIGD, for inviting me into this discussion. And I would like to also congratulate the research team for this really insightful presentation. So before I come to Imran Bhai's question, I just want to share some of the experience that I've got for working in this space for a couple of years now. So if we see the youth group in Bangladesh, what we see as, the population bulge is there. We are talking about demographic dividend, but when it comes to employment and skills training, in majority, these youth group are not much aware about the labor market. So that is one of the reasons, they really don't take up skills training, which would lead to employment at the first place. And there are like a couple of reasons behind that. So firstly, the lack of knowledge about the job market. And secondly, the access to information about the job market. So they really don't know where to go in order to get the skills training, or which sort of job that they should be applying to, or what are the market demand looks like. So that is one eye opener for me, working especially with the tertiary graduates in the last couple of years. Another thing is the perception of skills training. As we see that we have three streams of education: general education, madrasa, and TVET education. So, and historically, TVET education is seen as the third option. So every youth wants to become either doctors, engineers, or like having white-collar jobs. But the perception of TVET and the role of TVET and the growth in their career that TVET has a role to play is somewhat missing. So we really need to work on how to improve that space in order to change the perception. At the same time, how well we can create the access to information. So now I'm coming back to Imran Bhai's question about the digital divide. Definitely, we are seeing the same especially in this pandemic situation. We have also done one in-house study to really understand the access to digital devices. And what we have seen, with the youth group that we work, only 25 to 30% have the access to digital devices that will allow them to get any kind of training during the pandemic. As we have seen, like there are lots of online training has been, popping up, and there are various platforms that are providing this training. But this, 25% of this youth population that have that access is one alarming factor. Even if the ones who have the access, there is a gender disparity that we have seen. We have asked many girls if they have any access to, any digital devices in their home, which they can use to get any sort of digital or IT-based training. First question was whether or not they have that access. Yes, they have someone in their family who have that device that they thought they would like to, or they would get the access to receive training. And on the basis of them, they got the enrollment in various IT-based training that BRAC Skill Development Program offered. But after a couple of days, we have seen that, that access was not actually there, and it was quite limited. So in that aspect as well, like even if a girl has digital access to digital devices, but in reality, they really don't have that access when there's only one aspect about digital access or digital device access. So let me just touch base upon like what kind of challenges that we are facing from that perspective. So we work in the informal economy. We have seen informal economy has been highly disrupted through this pandemic. And we have also seen the school dropout rate has been increasing, and there are more demand in the supply end to get training in the informal market. But we have also seen in the informal market, the capacity for employment has reduced because of economic shift and economic challenges that the pandemic has caused. For the formal industry, we also provide 20, 30 courses, but the problem with formal classroom-based training is, unlike education, we cannot provide skills training through online. So it has to be practical. So someone who wants to learn, let's say, cell phone servicing, they really need cell phone in their hand. And through online training, it is not sufficient. It is not possible to provide training. That is the reason why in most of the cases, the skills training service providers are limiting their services within the skills that can be acquired online. That means like a lot of other skills which are necessary to be acquired are not being able to offer to this youth population. In the entrepreneurship space, we have seen a need for digital penetration. There are a lot of interest among the youth who are working as entrepreneurs to start business online. So e-commerce, F-commerce are the talk of the town these days, but they really lack digital literacy, where more training, more support, and more services should be provided. And talking about the lack of information that I've started my discussion with. So BRAC Skill Development Program also focused on creating that access to information, so that the youth with this changing situation can really know what kind of skills are required. Because like if we see pre-COVID and post-COVID, the market has shifted. There are new sectors who are booming up, but whereas like the others which used to have like really good demand are shrinking at this moment. So that to bridge that access, we are also initiated Career Hub, which provides actually the labor market related information. We do also provide employability services so that they become job ready, and after that they can be employed in various sectors. But on top of it, I just like to echo with Munir Bhai, who has correctly mentioned about the role of soft skills. When we talk about employment, it is not only about technical skills, how well you are technically, how sound you are actually technically, but also the softer part of the skills are also important. And for that reason, we have also incorporated soft skills in every of the training programs that we offer. But at the same time, we also added one element called psychosocial counseling, because as we have seen in the presentation, the mental well-being is becoming one of the blockage. It is not only about like getting the training or getting employed, but to make them ready even to receive the training, they really need psychosocial support. So we have initiated that bit, but I really think there are more to be done. And I think like there are a lot of things that has to be incorporated as far as like providing skills training and in the employment sector. Perception of the skills training has to be enhanced and has to be I should say like it has to be mass communicated, so that the miscommunication about skills is can be addressed. At the same time, we also need to talk more about like how well we can build environment for women to get jobs, not only to jobs, but also to skills training, and barriers and the bottlenecks that we have. There are some system level issues that has to be addressed, both in terms of wage-based employment and the self-employment. So I think I will stop here, but I'll be more than happy to answer if you have any questions about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joydeep. I think the sort of the 2 points, and I think this low uptake of training offering, I think is something that needs to be really taken very seriously. And I think we should really kind of stop kind of doing this kind of this grandstanding kind of statements about this, and really unpack this, and look at the plumbing, look at the whole plumbing parts of it, exactly where this low uptake problem is emerging from, and then really think about, very targeted interventions, because I think there is, of course, the government is interested and is investing. There are a lot of NGOs who is investing. There's been a lot of aid money also in this training, skills development area, and yet the uptake seems to be extremely low. So I think this really needs a very serious but a more detailed intervention-oriented, kind of approach. I think the second thing that you talked about, this is very interesting in terms of the online, online offering that is happening right now, and selection bias there that is creating in terms of certain types of, we are only focusing on those type of skills that can be onlineable in some ways. And that may actually not only exclude certain other types of skills, which is more difficult to be made online, but also some of the more formative skills that may be necessary for people to take advantage of the online skills may not be provided, and thereby increasing the inequality even further. So I think that's a very interesting insight, that I think one should kind of explore further. Great. So, I would now like to invite our distinguished guest today, Mr. Azharul Islam Khan. Is currently serving as the DG of Department of Youth Development, Ministry of Youth and Sports, Government of Bangladesh. Sir, obviously, you can, choose what you want to reflect on, but, I would particularly be sort of interested, to know, because a lot of the findings here are, quite concerning in terms of the future of employment opportunities and youth in the country. Who can be the real drivers of sort of entrepreneurship, growth, and so on and so forth. So would love to really hear from you, what your thoughts are, what your ministry is basically thinking, or your department is thinking in terms of addressing, some of the challenges that existed before, but have just become worse right now because of COVID. So over to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. It is very great opportunity for me to join this discussion, and I would like to give thanks Mr. Shakil and Asma. Their good presentation, and I think they have picked up some important statistics, and their presentation is very fruitful and valuable, I think. I would like to say something on behalf of DYD. In fact, the Ministry of Youth and Sports. Youth are the future leaders, planners, and decision makers for our nation. They are the most energetic and productive segment of the total population in Bangladesh. Therefore, the national development mostly depends on their working spirit and initiatives. As per National Youth Policy, the population in the age group of 18 to 35 years is considered to be youth. They are 1/3 of the total population and estimated to be around 50 million. Keeping this in view, the Department of Youth Development under the Ministry of Youth and Sports has been given the responsibility for transforming and disorganized and unproductive youth into an organized, disciplined, and productive workforce. Realizing the fact, the development of youth development has been implementing massive programs with special focus on youth development in order to address youth-related problems. To overcome the economic loss in youth by COVID-19 pandemic, Bangladesh needs to invest heavily in its human capital, transforming the youth labor force that is largely low-skilled and primarily engaged in the informal sector. In addition, Bangladesh should harness its demographic dividend. Bangladesh has been experiencing a youth bug with approximately 40% of its total population of 154 million below the age of 20. This large young population combined with a rapidly expanding labor market could be the key to moving the country to middle income status if there is a prevalence of low-skilled labor among the youth that remain unemployable even when jobs are created. Closures of business and unemployment due to the impact of COVID-19 will complicate the NEET scenario in Bangladesh. It is evident that COVID-19 has resulted in significant losses of income where youth are most affected. The prolonged lockdown is resulting in temporary job losses until the economy recovers, permanent job losses, business shutdowns in the medium terms, changes in job moving to less income generating jobs, swinging the business and reduction in the level of profit wages salary. In addition, young women are also exposed to some additional challenges during this pandemic. Limited access to health and mental care facilities, especially in remote areas, put their health at risk. An economic downturn as a result of the pandemic will disparity risk. An economic downturn as a result of the pandemic will disproportionately affect female students. Additionally, there is evidence that gender-based violence and human trafficking has escalated during the pandemic. Prior to the crisis, 24% of families, 8.4 million people, were below the poverty lines. It is also estimated that as many as 44% of the students' families could fall down the poverty line as a result of a 3-month lockdown. This means an additional 7.7 million families below the poverty line during the crisis, bringing the total number to 16.1 million. There are several long-term impacts of the looming poverty rates. Bangladesh may see an increase in child labor rates, child marriage, even child trafficking within the country and across the border, which will all lead to increase in school dropout rates when schools are reopened after the pandemic. Therefore, to address all these challenges, it is imperative to undertake a massive project in order to impart skill training to the rural need, that is not in education, employment or training, youth, and provide other supports including financing so that they are employed, self-employment, and can be entrepreneur. This project will especially target the vulnerable female, youth, and other cohorts of the marginalized youth so that they come out the NEET status and can contribute to the post-pandemic economic recovery of the country. Every year, around 2.2 million youth enter into the labor market, and most of them have no formal skill training. DYD can impart skill training up to 350,000 youth in the year. A project has been formulated to enhance the training uptake of DYD and within the coverage of training domain. Moreover, since the project has targeted rural need youth, it will contribute reducing rural, urban, marginal, and help to reduce congestion and overwhelming in the big cities. The following activities have been taken to overcome the impacts of COVID-19 as follows: identification of the trainable and unemployable rural need youth, ensure their registration for training. Special attention will be given on female youth and youth from vulnerable, marginalized, and disadvantaged, who also includes youth affected by the climate change, especially in the coastal, low-lying areas, returns, migrants, etc. Impart them skill training, provide financially and technical support, facilitate their access to labor market through establishing a functional network of the year. The employers, investors, bank, and financial institutions for their employment and self-employment. Reskill the returns migrants so that they are better employable both in local and overseas markets, and also utilize the knowledge and skill of the returns migrants in the designing the training modules. arrange certification for the trainees from the recognized competent authorities. However possible, promote self-employment for the year. Organize some test case pilot program for the transgender and ethnic communities. Raise awareness among the youth about various social and cultural issues such as child marriage, drug abuse, human trafficking, and terrorism, etc. Use union council establishment will be utilized as a training venue for rural NEET youth. District and Upazila Youth Office will provide necessary training supports including lab facilities. Mobile training center can be an open for hard to reach remote areas. A team of subject matter expert or trainers will be identified to impart the training. Trainers can be picked from other public organizations such as agriculture, fisheries, livestock, technical, and vocational institute, and the reputed NGOs who have been providing lifelong training for a long time. Area trades of training will be determined based on local needs, context, and penalties. I think I would like to conclude. Before conclusion, I would like to say, in this training session, we can arrange only per year 3.5 lakhs people, but in every year 20 lakhs people will come in people come in this nation. So we are designing a online training. Our one Mr. Monir Hussain pointed out that our capacity in fact, structural capacity in a year, we can train up people only 3 lakhs above, but our candidate would have to face 20 lakhs or 15 lakhs. So we are designing a training facilities, online training. Our all modules will be designed with the online, and everyone can take training from the online basis. So we are trying to recover this youth people in this effect of COVID. So I think, inshallah, we can overcome. And lastly, I want to conclude my address. Thank you. Thanks to everyone to invite me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Azharul Islam Khan, for that very comprehensive discussion on what the government is doing and its plan. So thank you very much for that. I would like to obviously let you know, Mr. Khan, that the work that we have done, and I'm sure it is also with respect to the work that Gage has recently done, we'll be very, very happy and extremely interested. If you want, we can have a separate conversation with your department people to talk about these findings, and if there is further discussion that would be helpful, please let us know. We will be extremely interested. Of course, the presentation and the report is going to be available, and we'll make sure that you receive a copy, and we can have further discussions if you want to. Great. I can't see any question and answer. Neither can I see anybody with raised hand, but let me open it up. We have got attendees. We've got about 11 attendees. So if anybody wants to intervene, wants to reflect on what has been presented, on the findings, the implications, or what some of the actions that different organizations or the government is taking. Let me open it up. If there's anyone who wants to come in. Great. I guess it's a bit late, so So people must be, quite tired. But thank you all very much. I mean, I don't really have much to conclude. I think we have had a rich set of discussion. We will. I mean, all the reports are going to be available, so we will share them with you. I just also want to let everyone know that we have this national youth sample frame that we have used for this phone survey. And now we have a much cleaner set of phone numbers. And we want to use this. We want to use this contact database that we currently have, which is much cleaner, to do further surveys. So we actually are very interested to think about and work with others, maybe to think about a national youth watch type of a piece of work where we can look at different issues facing the youth over a phone survey, which can be very cost effective over time. So I think this is something that we will be very interested in, and it would be really good to have a conversation. And I think Gage also can bring in adolescent sample, which will become youth over time. So I think there can be an opportunity here to come together to use our collective database that we have to really see, and now we have a phone contact base as well, to really see whether we can create a platform to generate evidence and insights that can help policy and practice. So this is a conversation I would like to have, perhaps later with some of you. But for today, thank you all very much. Thanks to the presenters. I mean, unless I just want to give a quick time to the presenters. If Shakil or Asma, do you have any last parting thoughts?
There's a question from
Sukarna Abdullah among our attendees. Okay, yes. Sukarna Abdullah.
Allowing you to talk now. I have unmuted your stream.
Thank you for the nice presentation.
Dr. Imran.
Sorry, can I just
leave because I have any assignment. I mean, now I'm in office.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay,
we will share the report with you.
Okay, see you again.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Sukarna Abdullah, if you could.
Thank you so much for the nice presentation. I don't have any specific question, but I would like to share one point from my organization on behalf of GIZ Bangladesh. We have shared one of our idea in this platform that we are much happy that there is a huge planning regarding the youth. GIZ under the rule of program is going to operate a community-based work with the assistance of 10 PNGOs in 7 districts. In our program design, our mostly project goal is to support the community-based people, that whether is the every door is the right doors. In our program design, we also really planning that we also include the youth people in our program design, so that they can identify the community people's different issues in sort of legal assistance, in terms of several supports which is provided from the government social safety net, so that youth people can play a vital role in our community. Because we have a huge experience that youth is a very experienced energetic people in our society. So in this platform, we are also sharing in our idea where we can involve youth people in our program design, so that they can contribute for the community people. This is one kind of planning I would like to share in this platform. And thank you so much for your nice presentation, and it will be much helpful for us in our program design, so that we can rethink how we can engage the community people in the youth power in more effectively. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sukarna Abdullah. If there are no other questions, and Shakil or Asma, if you don't have any concluding thoughts, do you want to come in with any thoughts?
Not really any thoughts, but I just want to thank everyone. It has been such a rich discussion, and we have also gotten some nice new points from Dr. Muni and also Joyuda. So thank you very much for your thoughts.
Great. Thank you all very much. We will share the report. It's all going to be available on the website. But as I said, we really want to engage further, because this is not an issue that is going to go away. It is an issue that is staring at us in our face. This is a critical demographic that we really need to take extremely seriously and think about interventions through which we can make things better and more hopeful. So I think this is going to be really important. And as a knowledge and research organization, BIGD would be extremely interested to work with different partners to provide evidence, insights, and analysis. So we will be in touch, and thank you all very much. Good night.
Thank you.